Hey everyone, I'm Patrick Jones and welcome to episode 51, if that gives me anxiety. Getting back from my work/vacation trip. Yeah, went to Utah as I'm wearing the Utah Jazz shirt that I went to a game and they had, a free shirt on every seat. A lot of fun there. But yeah, a little bit of work. Did some hiking in Canyonlands National Park and Arches. Saw some dinosaur tracks, which I have to say, it really... maybe it sounds dramatic, but it was a profound thing to see. There was a sign that said that they were 190 million years old. And it kind of puts our individual place in history in perspective. Look at me, very deep. I was down in Moab, Utah, and then Salt Lake City, and then Miami, which I've never been to before. Miami was incredible too. Downtown was awesome. Miami Beach is very cool and nice to relax and just like read a book. And I got back just in time for Halloween. Someone has got to hand out the candy. A lot more parents walk around with beers. That's what they're doing, taking their kids. Not that I'm judging, it's just kind of funny. A lot more kids are getting carted around in like a beach cart. Which is good. I guess it's good, if, especially for the little guys, right? They don't have to walk that far. And let's be honest, Halloween is taken when they're super, super young. That's all for the parents too, to take pictures and so you don't have an unhappy little baby strolling around too much on those little legs. But yeah, I overbought, and so now I'm gonna get chunky. From all the leftover Halloween candy. Well, I've got a great episode lined up. Today I will be featuring the full interview with the CEO of the Dave Thomas Foundation, Rita Soronen. Rita gives a lot of information about people who may be anxious as they're just starting their journey down the adoption road, or, it's a long road. So what to know, whatever point you're at on that. And it's good to know the amount of support that is out there for people thinking about that. But before we get there, I just want to remind you to rate and review the podcast if you're liking it, on whatever platform you're listening to it on. You can also check the show out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And if you're liking the show and you want to support it and support me, you can make a donation through the Buy Me a Coffee link. It's in the description wherever you're listening. Oh yeah, man, I feel good. I feel good after a trip. Especially the hiking in Canyonlands and Arches National Park. Just nice to walk in nature. It's a game changer. Well, as always, thank you so much for listening and enjoy the interview. Joining me now on the podcast, I have Rita Soronen, who's president and CEO of the Dave Thomas Foundation. Rita, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a delight to be here with you.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about adoption today, and specifically adoption through foster care.
That's right. Yep. And my favorite subject, as you might guess, and I'm looking forward to talking all about, the apprehension people might have, or just the misperceptions they may have, or just not everybody knows a lot about it. So it'll be good to chat about what this conversation is all about.
Of course, yeah. And for listeners of this podcast, the whole podcast is meant to make things known and to make things less scary, and information is always helpful. So kind of jumping right in here, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and talk a little bit about what the foundation does?
Sure. I'm delighted to be at the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption. It's a national nonprofit public charity that was founded by Dave Thomas. Some people may recognize and know him as the founder of the Wendy's company, those Frosties and French fries and square hamburgers. But what they may not know is that he was adopted as well. And so as he was getting on in his career and really wanted to put in place that notion of giving back to the community, it was built into the company's DNA. But they really wanted to sort of formalize, what does that mean? He created the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption as a national nonprofit public charity to focus exclusively in the United States and Canada on children who were in foster care and waiting to be adopted. And we're wholly separate from the Wendy's company, but we are proud partners in all kinds of activities, including the fact that we're the charity of choice of Wendy's franchisees and suppliers and the corporate office. But that notion in 1992, when he created the foundation, was to really begin to elevate this conversation about certainly all kinds of adoption. If people are thinking about creating or expanding their family, there are lots of ways to do that. But in 1992, there wasn't a lot of conversation or understanding about what is this notion of adopting a child who's already had a family and they're in foster care and they're there for a reason, but we're not sure why. And how might I get into that? So he really wanted the foundation to step into beginning to elevate that conversation, talking about what the process was. But we're also, as a nonprofit organization, a grant-making organization. So beginning to share our resources with other organizations that could effectively and efficiently move children out of foster care and into adoptive homes. So we do all of that in a number of ways.
Incredible. I mean, what a man concentrated on joy and happiness, right? Whether it's as small as a cheeseburger or as large as helping a child find a forever home.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, that's wonderful. I guess I'd like to share that. I do have a little bit of experience with the foster care, I was going to say industry, but that's incorrect, but just the foster care system. My grandparents, after having several kids of their own, opened their home to many different children, some for brief stints, and they adopted, I want to say, as many as 5 or 6 officially.
Wow.
And so growing up, there was always another kid running around, and they may have stayed and be technically one of my aunts or uncles now, or it's, and I just share that as more of having seen the foster care system and the needs of the children coming through, right? Like my grandparents weren't equipped to help everyone, be it a child who witnessed something unfortunate and it had to be moved out of the home. It takes so much. And so I wanted to just put it out there that there's such more people, and people who do get into caring for other children. I mean, it's just, it's so heartwarming to think of how big these people's hearts really are.
That's awesome. And I love hearing those stories. And what we find in the work at the foundation is the more we reach out, the more we talk, it really has either fostering as foster parents or volunteering somehow and becoming a mentor to a child, or taking that step and adopting from foster care has impacted a lot of people. So it's great to hear those stories. And I think the more we hear the conversation, the less scary or the less just unknown it becomes. And these children then have a better chance at both a childhood and a thriving adulthood.
Of course, yeah. And I feel like the stories that do tend to rise to the top are when things go sour or something unfortunate has happened. And it's just like, I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me. It may be something that you would be able to speak to, but it happens with all kinds of news, right? That we hear the negative and not the larger percentage of positive stories.
That's exactly it. And look, these children are in care through no fault of their own. They've been abused or neglected or abandoned, or much more frequently over the past couple of decades, parents have substance abuse issues that rise to such a level that they can't care for their children. It's a rare parent that intends to harm their child, right? But what we know is that children have to be protected. They have to be safe. And that's when the state intervenes if there's a circumstance where either a child's physically abused, sexually abused, or that notion of neglect, doesn't have food, housing, appropriate care, then that's when the state takes an interest. And right now, as we're talking today, there are about 434,000 children in foster care. They're in some sort of substitute care in the United States. Now, hopefully they're with extended family. That's the first best place for these children, but so many of them are not. They're in sort of stranger homes. Our goal is to get those children home. Is there a way to provide wraparound services, support? What does this family need to keep that child and to get that child back home? That's where children grow and thrive. Look, we're all homing pigeons at heart. No matter what we've experienced, home is where we identify. And so that's our job, is to get them there. But right now, for about 117,000 of those children, the abuse has risen to such a level, or that the courts have made a determination after quite a period of time that this child can never go home. And so the court legally separates that child from family. And then those are the children for whom the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption really centers its programs and its communications. That 117,000 children who have been freed for adoption, they're no longer a part of that biological family, at least legally. And now they're waiting for another family to step forward and bring them into their home.
Excellent. Well, yeah. Oh, man. That's so many kids. My goodness. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the different kinds of adoption, right? We're talking about foster care. Just because of my history and growing up, I thought that was like the main way. But I guess another one comes to mind of just like an orphanage. And so I guess, why would a kid wind up in an orphanage? I frankly, I don't even know if we still do orphanages here in the United States. And now that I've given you 15 questions at once while rambling, I will be quiet and allow you to speak.
No, it's perfect. That's what these conversations are all about. There are multiple ways that a child gets adopted. One that's most frequent and probably less complex is step-parent adoption, right? A child is adopted by a step-parent.
Mm-hmm.
But the other main kinds, in addition to foster care, is international adoption. So folks may want to go to another country. Typically, that's because they're interested in adopting an infant, and they have this global view of the world. They may be driven by some faith-based tenet, or they may be driven by this notion that children shouldn't be in orphanages. And that's typically where orphanages exist now, are in foreign countries, not in the United States. We've got group homes in the United States that are getting less frequent, where numbers of children would stay together for a temporary period of time. But technically, we don't have orphanages at all in the United States anymore. And then there's that notion of domestic private infant adoption. So a family that's really, really wants to bring an infant into their home for whatever reason, they either can't have an infant or they choose not to, but they still want to raise a child from infancy. Then they go through attorneys and private agencies and frequently are in contact with the birth mother, and then adopt that child once that child is born. The difference with foster care adoption, again, is those children are placed there because they've experienced certain layers of trauma. And the difference is there are fewer infants in the foster care system. They may be part of sibling groups, but the average age of a child in foster care waiting to be adopted is about 9. And so we begin to talk about, what would it be like to bring an older child into your home if perhaps you've already had, you've raised a family from infancy. You've had either through the other kind of adoption or through birth, you've raised children from infancy, and you've decided you still have room in your home, but you don't really want to deal with diapers or midnight feedings or raising a toddler again. That's where this notion of considering an older youth adoption really is the sweet spot of foster care adoption. Because here's what we also know, is that every year, even though we've promised to these children that our job is to find them a family if they've been legally freed for adoption, about 20,000 children each year turn 18 and leave the foster care without a family. They either came in at an older age, they may have come in at 15 or 16. And so families tend not to think about a 16-year-old as their first idea of adopting out of foster care. And so they age out. We call it aging out of foster care. We also know that the result of a child leaving foster care without a family can cause challenges for that child, not because they're bad kids, but they're much more likely, because they don't have that safety net of family, to be homeless or to be undereducated or to be unemployed or to fall into other systems again. So our job is to, no matter what the age of a child is, no matter what their journey has been, no matter what that family circumstance has been, our job is to make sure that every child who has been freed for adoption and is in the foster care system waiting for a family has every opportunity for an adoptive family and a home.
That's an extremely worthwhile mission.
Can we talk? I know you've got a lot on your plate. You've got work, you've got friends, you've got family, pets, you've got the people that you make small talk with at the coffee shop or gym. You've got that bird that you see when you wake up every morning outside your window that you've projected things onto. Look at that bird. Doesn't even love its family. It's always by itself. You do that. Everyone does that. Point is, you've got a lot on your plate. Well, that's why there's Instacart, to take a little bit off your plate. Using Instacart, you search for all your favorite foods and things that you need from the grocery store, all online, all while you're looking at that bird, wondering why it hasn't called its mom. And they deliver it to you. They go to the store and do the shopping for you. And they can deliver it in as fast as an hour. And you can sign up by clicking the link in the description, wherever you're listening or watching. And that's a great way of supporting the show. So it's a great way of supporting this show. It's a great way to make your life a little bit easier, because we all know that you have so much going on, like wondering whether that bird judges you back.
Talking about aging out at 18. I mean, I don't know about you, but I can say with certainty that I didn't have my legs under me until, like, let's be honest, like 26, right? Where I felt, all right, I know exactly what I need to be doing and moving forward. And very lucky to have had a family that supported me, right? So it's like 18 is still a baby, right?
It's a crazy way of thinking that a child can be on their own at 18 and thrive.
Mm-hmm.
And so when there are challenges, we ascribe fault to those children. Well, they must have done something wrong, right?
Yeah.
When think of it, I've got to have a car and a place to live and a job. And so I might have lined all those things up, and then my car breaks down and I can't get to my job, and I am living on, from paycheck to paycheck. And suddenly all three of those are gone and I'm homeless. And if I had a family and my car broke down, I could call mom or I could call dad and I could say, I know you're going to get mad at me, but I need a ride to work. And they'll get there, right? Or they can come back home at 21 or 26 or 30. Or think about these children during the pandemic, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were already placed in care. All of those visits with potential adoptive families or their social workers or extended family members stopped for a certain period of time. So they're already isolated, and that compounded that sense of isolation. Or they move frequently when they're in care because a foster family says, you know what, I can't take care of a child any longer right now. Or during the pandemic, they had health or economic issues, and so a child had to move again. And so again, all of those issues that begin to compound on that child's life and their soul and their shoulders, of frequent moves, of being more at risk of even during the pandemic, of contracting COVID, of not knowing where I'm going to be tomorrow. Am I going to be going to school? They might be living in a household that didn't have access to solid internet, and so school became an issue. The challenges for our children in foster care were compounded dramatically during the pandemic, as they were for everyone, of course. But this population of children who already had experienced that trauma of removal from their home, of going into a strange government system, and now having to somehow figure out how to thrive, or if they left care during the pandemic, figuring out how to get a job, how to support themselves. It was just phenomenal. We're starting to come out of that, but we've learned a lot from that alone.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. And I mean, everyone can sort of appreciate the fact that if your basic needs aren't met, you can't focus on the next level task of going to school. Or if you're hungry, your first thought is, and you won't advance past the fact that I'm hungry, right?
Exactly.
Or wondering where you're going to live. I mean, our brains really can only handle so much at a time to focus on.
Exactly. And children at that age are still in brain development, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that executive decision-making capacity that, look, in normal thriving families, if you go to a party and you start talking about your teenagers, what happens to everybody in the room? Everybody starts rolling their eyes. They've got a horror story about what my teenager did, right? They're doing that because that's the normal developmental stage of teenager. They're testing, they're asserting their independence, they're challenging. That's what they're supposed to be doing. But you add that to the layers of trauma of a 17-year-old in foster care, wondering where they're going to be, and you're going to potentially have some acting out behaviors or some challenges with trust. They're experiencing such grief and loss and continuing lack of trust because potentially some of them have been raised in a system that, again, we put these children at such a disadvantage. Our responsibility is to, as quickly as we can, get them into the safety net of a family and allow them to make mistakes, allow them to grow and thrive, allow them to try and assert their independence and challenge the status quo, because that's how we all learned how to be adults. But somehow we deny that of children in foster care.
I know, that's so sad. You're exactly right. I love the way of putting it. That's what they're supposed to be doing, right? You're supposed to be, that's this natural step from childhood to adulthood.
Exactly.
So yeah, some people tend to look down on people, children, right?
Yeah.
who are only doing what's naturally their brains are inclining them to do. I want to switch and talk about the other side of this. So I don't know if you've seen it, and I don't know. It's always a risk to put a reference out there to see if, because then if you haven't seen it, we're misconnecting a little bit. But the idea for this episode came from a TV show called Trying. It's a UK-based show on HBO, and at first they were trying to get pregnant and couldn't, and then they started into the adoption care system, and it talks about like the issues and the lengths that they had to go. Is that accurate? Is it a particularly difficult process?
It is. It can be a difficult process, first and foremost, because it's an unknown. None of us know anything about the child welfare system unless we've either worked there, we've experienced it from a lived experience, or somehow we're connected through social workers or judges or courts or some way. Otherwise, it's just this unknown territory. But look, it's a government system. At the heart of it, it's a government system. These children are in the custody of the state. And so it's fraught with all of those challenges of overwhelmed workers, a constant turnover of workers because they're not paid well enough for the work that they do. And it's burnout. This is hard work, or a lack of a return phone call. That's the negative side. But there are also these time periods that it takes. So we don't want to quickly make decisions. We want to make sure that a child is safe. There are both legislative timelines and there are policy timelines about what happens at each stage in this process. From the point of removal of a child from foster care, they may come in, an adult could go in and get trained and licensed as a foster parent. They can get trained and licensed as a foster to adopt parent. So they may have had a child in their home for a period of time, fostering them. And then the decision was made that this child can't go home, they're freed for adoption. And then that family is looked at for potential adoption. That takes time. But even that, stepping into the process. So there's paperwork to fill out. There are classes, mandatory classes to take. There are background checks that have to occur, of course, for the safety of the children. There's a home study where there's a thorough look at the safety of the home, of the people in the home, of background checks on all the people in the home. So there's a home study that has to occur. Each one of these things takes time and aren't necessarily always scheduled at the convenience of the people that are stepping forward. And then even once we get past all that and a child is placed in a potential adoptive family's home, most states have about a 6-month waiting period before that can move to court for that to be legally finalized as an adoption. So it can take anywhere from, we say, 12 to 18 to 24 months from that point of first discovery that I think I want to do this, and I tiptoe into the child welfare agency and begin the process, to that final adoption court hearing when that child becomes legally mine. And in between that is dealing with social workers and court hearings and all of that stuff that just, again, isn't something that's part of our everyday life until you step into it. So I think the unknown is the biggest factor. And what we say to people is really, really do a lot of research ahead of time. Mm-hmm. The internet is full of links to adoption agencies, processes for adopting. On our website at davethomasfoundation.org, we've got a beginner's guide to adoption. Really learn as much as you can about the system so it doesn't perhaps catch you by surprise when you begin to walk into it. But also take a real hard look at your family and yourself, and be really hard on yourself. What do I want? Am I willing to adopt a teenager? Am I willing to adopt a sibling group? Could I handle a child with special needs? And if the answer is no to any of those, that's okay. There's no judgment. It's an honest assessment of what I can handle as a parent or what my family can handle. But if the answer is yes, then explore what those opportunities are and where you can begin to develop a network around you of others who have adopted or gone through the foster care system, so that you have a supportive network around you as well. So yes, not unlike the UK, and we have very similar systems as the UK. It can take a period of time. It can seem grueling. I think the one thing that I say to folks is expect the unexpected at all turns, but go into it with an open heart and an open mind, and know that at the end of the day, this is about what's best for a child, and no one intends to make it complex or difficult. It's just the nature of the beast.
Right. As you described, I mean, government agencies aren't really known for their speed, especially when they're going to place a defenseless child in the care of a stranger. So
Absolutely.
I guess when you reframe, because I feel like a lot of people who are about to adopt are nervous that they're not going to come off as good enough, and right, and they are doing these hard assessments like you're talking about and kind of beating themselves up. But if you reframe it, that may help, that it's just like, this is a good thing. This is the state doing what has to be done so that these kids wind up in a better situation in which they're coming from.
Exactly. And we know from research that we do that, we take this routine sort of scan of Americans' attitudes about foster caring and foster care adoption. We know that the majority of folks come into foster care adoption in particular because they want to help a child. So they come in for all the right reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want that to get dampened in a process that seems like it goes on longer than I thought, or I'm not getting a phone call returned, or I'm really frustrated by the paperwork I have to continue to do. Keep in mind what drew you there in the first place, which is I want to help a child in need.
Right, of course. And you mentioned potentially surrounding yourself with others who have either going through or have gone through. How can people find that? I'm sure there's multiple ways, but yeah, where can people start to build that network?
Absolutely. And first and foremost, when you take the required classes, you're going to be in with a group of other people that are going through the same process. So that's that first place to start making those connections.
Mm-hmm.
But frequently, depending on your place of worship or your place of employment, there may be affinity groups, for example, in your place of employment of people who have adopted, if it's a large enough business. And so, launch into those affinity groups, or frequently places of worship have support groups for families within their community that have adopted. And so grab onto that. But other places, other organizations, and this is where good communication with the agency that you're working with, and it could be a public agency or a private agency, good communication with them. Frequently, they support networks of families who have adopted, or they can at the very least connect you with others who have adopted as well. And so that you can begin to build that network. Critically important is that extended family you already have around yourself, or friends that you have around yourself. Loop them into the process. Here's what I'm doing. Here's what I hope happens within the next 18 to 24 months. I might have to lean on you for support. I need you to understand why I'm doing this. I need you to understand who my child is and what they've gone through. And so begin to gather your family and friend network around you too, that you may not think of as a professional adoption network, but they're going to be the best people to go to, both in times of, like any parenting, right?
Mm-hmm.
In times of joy and in times of challenges, you need people around you. Parenting is not it shouldn't be a solo process.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. That's such good advice that I hadn't even considered. For any problem in your life, or not even defining it as a problem, just anything that's new or different or causing anxiety, having an emotional support system and talking about your feelings can alleviate a lot of concerns in that regard. So I love what you're saying there.
Absolutely. And you're right. We can be the hardest on ourselves, particularly with a child who's already experienced grief and loss and trauma, and may, get comfortable with a new adoptive family, and then 6 to 12 months down the road starts experiencing some maybe challenging behaviors. That don't think of it as a negative if you have to reach out and get some professional help in order to help this child through this process, and to help with my parenting skills with this child who has experienced trauma. And again, those are the kinds of things that social workers will be talking to you about if you jump into this, and helping hopefully get you connected, or here's where resources exist in your area. Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption can also help with that. But it's important to say, I'm not a failure if I have to ask for help. I'm doing exactly what I should be doing if I have to ask for help.
Today's episode is sponsored by My Software Tutor. Can Excel be my friend? Do you want a new friend? Thinking about making new friends both makes me excited and sad. So it can be hard to make friends as you get older. And so I feel like sometimes you get surrounded by people. It's like, yeah, I guess we're friends. But also, if you truly connect with someone, you can make new friends as an adult. On both sides of the fence here. So Excel can be your friend, or it could be surrounding you. That's just probably because you don't know it that well. Many people, I've deviated so far from the copy, let me get back to it. Can Excel be my friend? Many people have wondered this for years. The answer is, yes, it can. That was so much shorter than where I was going with it. All right, let's talk about My Software Tutor. They offer 3 levels of real-time Zoom-based courses with a live instructor. They all deliver practical, functional business skills in a friendly, supportive environment. That sounds nice. I mean, it could be so daunting to learn Excel or make friends. These courses will increase your marketability, whether you're an employee, job seeker, consultant, or contractor. That sounds pretty good. Register at mysoftwaretutor.com and use the promo code POD20 to save 20% off all registrations.
Well, you beat me right to my next question, which was, let's say a child is in your house and it feels a little bit daunting. That's incredible to know that it's not just like, okay, here's your child, good luck, right? The social workers seemingly, well, I'll let you just take it away. What kind of support is there? I mean, you mentioned social work and your organization, but yeah, maybe a little bit more formally.
Absolutely. And most agencies are very conscious of what we call this post-adoption support, right?
Mm-hmm.
They know that families may need connections, assistance. There is actually financial assistance that follows most of these families who adopt out of foster care. So there's help with that, medical and mental health care as well. Mm-hmm. But again, you may have to dig through and find those right connections, but they're there. And it's important to really, really develop good communication with the caseworker that you work with throughout the whole process, because frequently that can be a person you can turn to post-adoption. Technically, legally, caseworkers and the Child Welfare Agency has no right of access into a final legal adoption. But if the family reaches back out, that's okay. You can reach back out and say, I need some help with this. And they're the ones that will get you immediately to some kinds of resources in your community where you can continue a conversation, or maybe even just a phone call that helps you over a moment.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Right. That can be so helpful, even
Right.
as small as just, man, I just need somebody in the know to kind of listen. Right.
Exactly.
And I'm trying really hard here. And this may be new for you, may be a new parent.
Exactly.
In adopting, and all of a sudden it's not an infant, right? It's a walking, talking child who has emotions and
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So that's great. It's great to have those resources. That alleviates a lot of anxiety that I was trying to put myself in that position by knowing that you're not alone.
Yeah, not alone. And again, it can be challenging, or there may be hesitation with adults sort of self-selecting out of an asking for help process. But one thing that we do at the foundation is we provide grants to organizations. And one that we've worked with for a number of years provides training for adoption for mental health counselors. There are dynamics of abuse and neglect. There are dynamics of having gone through the child welfare system that's different than just having an infant by birth, right? And so training adoption competent mental health providers helps a family make sure they have the right kind of service as well. So a good question, if you're going the route of, I need some extra mental health services here for me or for my child, understanding if that counselor understands the adoption process is critical.
Yeah, that's a great reminder. I'm curious about the would you refer to it as the matching aspect of adoption, in that parents to a child? How does that work?
Yeah, part of, again, it's all about open communication. So as you're going through the training, as you're going through working with your caseworker, it's really important. And you do that self-assessment to say, I think a child from age 5 to 10 would be perfect for our family. Mm-hmm. Making sure you communicate that so that when the caseworker begins, when you're ready and you've gone through all the steps and you're ready to begin having a child come into your home that may be in a potential permanent placement in your house, the caseworker knows this family really doesn't want an infant or a toddler, or this family really is not interested in a 16-year-old child, and they'll do their best to make that match. I will say that they won't stop there. As they get to know you as a family and you get to know them, and they might say, okay, I know you said 5 to 10, but I've got this 11-year-old that I think would fit really nicely with your family. Again, stay open, I think, to the conversation, but you don't have to compromise. If you really don't want to adopt a teenager, then you make sure that that's communicated. And then once that child or children are identified, then there's this period in which they begin to introduce that child. The caseworker begins to introduce that child or children to the family. They have a number of opportunities to meet, to spend some time on a limited basis so you can begin to get to know each other. And frankly, so the child can begin to get to know you. Their voice should be important in this process too, depending on their age. And once that goes in a way that everybody feels comfortable, then the caseworker will place that child in your home to do this sort of, I hate to call it a trial period, but the courts usually say about 6 months. It is indeed a trial period. Is this going to be a match that works for the family, but most importantly for the child? And then once all of that goes through, then they begin to schedule that final court hearing. The judge, though, will also ask at that final court hearing, will ask the child, will ask the family a number of questions. Do you understand that this is forever? This is a permanent placement. Are you willing to take this child as if they had been born to you and have all the rights and legal obligations that you would have as if this were a child by birth? And so the judge will again guarantee and will check the record and make sure that everything's in place. And then once that gavel hits the desk, that child is permanently your child. So I think that matching process is critical of communication. Who might be best for my family, particularly if I have other children in the family and I don't want to really interrupt birth order, that might be a consideration. Or I really would consider maybe a sibling set of 2, but I'm not sure I could handle a sibling set of 5. So really communicating what you think you can handle and then being open to the children that might come in front of you.
Yeah, that's a good way of framing your mindset going into something like that.
Do you wish you were one of those thoughtful card people, but don't have the time or energy? I don't know why I did bunny ears on that. Or maybe you had a personal assistant. I like to pretend sometimes when I'm running errands that I am my own person. I make up games in my head. I might be revealing too much about myself. But you don't need to pretend to be your own personal assistant, at least when it comes to cards. Because the Cardist Studio is your personal assistant. Let's set up a situation. You think, oh, I should send them a card. But things get in the way. You're busy. All you'd have to do is jump onto thecardiststudio.com and tell them exactly what just popped in your head and why. And you'll get credit for your thoughtfulness. Here's what they'll do with that information. They'll get your personalized message handwritten into the card and into the mail for you. And you don't have to save space in your brain for this character that you've created as a made-up personal assistant. This bit is really getting off the rails. It's fast, it's custom, and it's a total life changer. Hey, you are a thoughtful card person now. Thecardiststudio.com. Thoughtful. Just got easy. And you can use the promo code AnxietyPod for 10% off your orders.
So I've heard a few things that would be helpful, but I'm curious if I pose the question to you, what's the most important
thing that someone going into the adoption process should know? What would you think that is?
I think adopting from foster care, it's critically important to recognize these children come from other families. And depending on their age, they're going to remember those other families. And they're going to feel a sense of grief and loss. And what did I do wrong? Why am I here? Why did my family not love me well enough that I have to go over here? So respect and honor the history that a child has. And if at all possible, if it's safe, engage extended family members with that child when you feel it's appropriate. The second piece is this is permanent. This isn't a I can give this child back after a year. This doesn't feel right. That determination has been made with pre-finalization, because the last thing we want to do is further traumatize a child and say, this isn't working out. You're back in the system, even though I legally adopted you. So respect and honor who this child is, where they came from, and where they're going, but understand that this is permanent and that love is great. It's exactly what makes up a family, but it doesn't fix necessarily all of the circumstances that surrounded this child. And so when a child pushes back or resists connecting at a point, understand it's not about you. This is about the child, and help the child get to that next level of trust.
That's great. Yeah. It's sometimes we all just need a little bit of space to work out our stuff, right? Love
Yeah.
a lot of things, but
Yeah.
um, sometimes you just got to handle it. And that's great. That's a great reminder.
Exactly.
Well, how can people get involved with the foundation?
So we've got, like everyone else, a great website, davethomasfoundation.org. And on there is all kinds of information there. And in fact, I would direct them first to videos. There are incredible family videos that show families that have come together through foster care adoption. So you begin to get a flare of what these families have expressed that feels good about having gone through this process. The Beginner's Guide to Adoption is there, and lots of other resources are there. You can also call our number 800-ASK-DTFA, and during normal work hours, and we're on Eastern Standard Time, you'll get folks that can talk you through a process as well. You can send an email to us, we'll get information back to you, but lots of resources that we can connect you with. We also have a program that's embedded in all of the states across the country that we support full-time adoption professionals that implement a model that we created that really works on behalf of those children most at risk of aging out of care. So teenagers, children in sibling groups, children with special needs, they're not the first thought of people that are thinking of adoption frequently. And so they're more at risk of aging out of care. We give grants to agencies to hire those full-time adoption professionals that implement this model that works phenomenally well on behalf of these kids. We can get you connected to an agency that we fund in a state that you might be in and get you a direct line into agencies that we know and have funded and know do great work on behalf of children as well.
Incredible. And for people listening, I'm going to put all this information in the description on whatever platform you're listening to, so you're only a click away. Well, Rita, I've learned a lot here. I love that. I love knowing just how much support there is out there for people. And so I really want to stress that. I mean, that was like the main thing that stuck out to me, that like, you will be supported in this decision.
Yes.
You're not alone. But I just want to double check if there's anything you think I'm missing. Is there something else about foster adoption that you would like to add, or about the foundation that you would like to add?
Yeah, we always quote Dave Thomas, who said, these children are not someone else's responsibility. They are our responsibility. We applaud people that step forward and think of children in our community who are in care through no fault of their own as their responsibility, whether it's fostering, adopting, or volunteering. That as scary and daunting as this process may be, if we step back and think about what a child has experienced and the fear that they experience every day of their lives, it might take that edge off the fear as adults of jumping into an unknown system. And yes, that there is support every step of the way.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.
I do as well. Thank you. Did I miss anything, do you think?
No.
Okay.
It was great.
Right.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you so much to Rita for coming on and giving me that interview. And thank you so much to the Dave Thomas Foundation for helping me set that up. Definitely reach out to them if you have any questions. They have a lot of information out there and a lot of ways that they can help you. So before I get to the weird thing that was causing me anxiety this week, I want to remind you of my other podcast called Death Space Filling the Void. There's also the Buy Me a Coffee link if you're liking the show and you want to make a donation to help me keep making them. You can do that, whatever amount you feel comfortable with, and that is very much appreciated. It's called the Buy Me a Coffee link. If you want to sign up for Instacart, there's a link in the description where you can do that. And by doing it that way, you're telling Instacart that this show sent you, which also helps support the show. Then there's My Software Tutor if you want to learn more about Excel and other programs like that to help give your resume a boost. You can even take 20% off with the promo code POD20. And then there's the Cardist Studios offering the promo code AnxietyPod for 10% off. Make sure you're taking advantage of that. So yeah, the weird thing that was giving me anxiety this week, we lived in this neighborhood before we bought this house, but first, a different section of the neighborhood. And I was anxious about the turnout of Halloween. You don't want the neighborhood to be lame and there be too little, but you also don't want people to be, you don't want to be on the craziest block, right? You don't want people going all the way out. I don't know what that means. Like, what adults aren't going to come by and egg your house, but I had that thought. But what if it's too crazy? What if they were filming a makeshift version of thriller in the streets until 3 a.m. Oh, man. But yeah, it all worked out. It was a lot of fun it's always fun to joke around with the parents and the kids as they come to the door to trick or treat. Some really fun costumes, including a kid who was dressed as Doctor Strange. And I'm a big fan of Doctor Strange. I think those movies are fantastic. It's a great character, right? The powers are really fun. And so I said to the kid, like, oh man, great costume. I love those movies. And this kid was like, yeah, he's all right. As if to be like, well, I needed to wear something. You know, it's not my life, buddy. Just give me the candy and let's be done with this interaction. Oh, man, too funny. I laughed right on the spot. Well, as always, thank you so much for listening.